Welcome to CASA's webinar on Atma Nirbharta, India and the defense procurement, a specific webinar to address issues. We've been doing these in a series consistently, and this is now the most relevant subject. We have put together.
Yeah, Shankar.
We have put together. Yes, Admiral Puri, we can hear you now. Can you hear us?
There's some technical glitch at the end, I guess.
Can the others hear me? Then I'll continue.
Yes. You please go ahead.
So we've put together these series of webinars, and we've been doing these consistently. We've had extremely good participation, both by way of an intelligent and discerning audience and extremely eminent speakers. Today's subject, of course, is relevant in the context of the larger Atma Nirbharta Bharat or Atma Nirbharta India. And perhaps the Chinese aggression across the LOC has led to a refocusing on being self-reliant in the defense production area as well. MOD on the 9th of August prohibited the import of 101 items in a phased way. In fairness, MOD has been striving for self-reliance for 3 decades. In 1993, a committee headed by Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam had suggested a plan to increase domestic components to 70% from 30%, but nothing really came out of it. 1999, after Kargil, the indigenization program came back into focus. So is it really only a crisis that makes us smell the coffee when it comes to defense procurement? In 2006, the MAKE procedure was adopted to promote design and development of futuristic equipment. The category was split into 2 in 2016 and is now proposed to be split into 3 for efficacy. Is banning of imports the way to become self-reliant? Will a swim or sink approach work what is being envisaged or attempted now? I can only think of Bob Dylan in his famous 1962 song where he said, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind." The funds needed for this entire procedure, where will that come from? The existing defense procurement procedure, DPP 2016, by IDDM, Indian Design, Development and Manufacture, hasn't worked to the extent that one had hoped. The track record of defense PSUs over the last 6 decades in terms of delivery and quality has not been what one could have hoped. The Indian defense budget, as everyone here will know, was 448820 crores, which is a staggering sum in the year 2019-20. But the R&D component there was a mere 9%. HAL has reportedly produced Jaguars with leaky fuel lines and is unable to produce in adequate numbers Tejas Mk-1A. The Navy's 75 I-class project, should it go to L&T or the government-owned Mazagong docks? Should a PSU be preferred? Aren't both the private sector and public sector a part of Atma Nirbharta Bharat? Much like Indigo or SpiceJet when viewed in the context of Air India in Indian skies. Corporatization of the Ordnance Factory Board has been announced, leading to the 3 federations of defense manufacturing sector workers of OFB issuing the notice of a nationwide indefinite strike from 12th October. We have to see how that pans out. On the 20th of May, the Prime Minister outlined his vision for an Atma Nirbharta Bharat. On 27th August, he spoke about it in the defense context and the setting up defense corridors in Tamil Nadu and UP. The PM wished India become a reliable supplier of defense equipment to many friendly nations, strengthen India's role as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. PM further mentioned the Defense Production and Export Promotion Policy Draft. This document, can we use this to dialogue with all stakeholders and leapfrog the way we did in the telecom sector? These things don't happen. These things don't happen overnight, and considerable effort on a protracted basis is needed to really take it forward effectively. Should we amend or enhance the scope of Make in India to read Make/Made with India to increase cooperation with other countries and ease technology transfers. The defense offset policy in vogue from 2005 has seen several iterations. In its present avatar, is in sync with Atma Nirbharta in defense or not? Mittelstand of Germany, which was copied by France to help the MSME sector. In India, that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And do we want to limit this defense procurement in the private sector to a few biggies, thus making it some sort of oligarchy? Should we not scout for disruptive technologies, help create champions by providing monetary support from a sovereign fund for this specific purpose? Can the PM's IDEX initiative create a Muskian India? And finally, the last question, can Atma Nirbharta bring about a Nirbhay Bharat? To discuss this and several other issues, please join me in welcoming Shri Sanjay Mitra, IAS, former Defense Secretary and Professor of Practice, IIT Delhi, Vice Admiral Raman Puri, former Chief of Integrated Service Command, Shri J.D. Patil, Director, Larsen & Toubro, Lieutenant General Gautam Murthy, former DG Ordnance Services, Lieutenant General Shankar, former DG Artillery and Professor of Practice, IIT Chennai, Lieutenant General Shubrata Saha, former Deputy Chief of Army Staff and member National Security Advisory Board. May I now request General Murthy, founder of CASA, to hit the road running. Over to General Murthy.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Manoj, for this excellent preamble, which has really set the tone for this webinar. Basically, to discuss various issues on current and strategic affairs, and in this way, looking at civil-military fusion. The aim of this webinars, we propose to have webinars on policy issues, finances, big industry, private, government, MSMEs. We're looking at corporatization of OFD and also webinars on startups. So this is the first of the series of webinars that we propose to hold. A few words in the historical context. Basically, in India, we found that there's been a lack of understanding on strategic issues. The fact that we approached the United Nations and J&K in 1948 actually started the trend. We gave up on the Haji Pir Pass in 1965. Before that, we did not understand what China was saying in 1959. In the Shimla Accord 1972, we returned our prisoners of war without any firm commitment from Pakistan. We've had a series of coalition governments since 1984. We've had also a lot of procurement-related scandals, the Bofors scandal, the HTW submarine scandal. And of course, there's this guns versus butter debate that keeps happening all the time. We are saddled with a number of socialist era behemoths that we need to shed or we need to transform. Primarily amongst them is the ordnance factories, which we actually inherited from the British Raj, and we went on and converted them into a typical Russian style Soviet style factories. We have done defense procurement, but in spurts. There's the crisis of 1971, 1999, 2000, 2001. Again, we had these crises. At that time, we imported some equipment. But basically, we missed a lot of opportunities. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1990, 1991 was a great chance for us to pick up a lot from them and move ahead. The liberalization in 1993, we could have also gone onto the bandwagon. The nuclear explosions of 1998, when the world shut us down, we should have started our Atma Nirbhar then. We missed out on it. But why now? We believe that there's a rising profile of India. We have belligerent neighbors who are constantly at us. We are also seeking strategic independence. We wish to revive our economy, our military-civil fusion. Imports are basically a drain on our exchequer. And we wish to leverage the strengths of the private sector and also the strengths of the DRDO for the private sector. The major reforms that have taken place in the last few months are firstly the increase of FDI from 49% to 74% in the defense sector, which is really huge. The Defense Acquisition Procedure 2020 has just been laid out. The corporatization of the Ordnance Factory Board has been taken on with full extent with the KPMG and the Khaitan and Company as consultants. There is a proposal to convert it to 100% government-owned entities and basically to improve the functioning. A word about the defense acquisition procedure. I would like to say that we have been told that all the stakeholders have been consulted according to the press note issued. The user, the industry and its association, think tanks, the Directorate of Military Affairs, the Department of Military Affairs, sorry, the Department of Defense Production, the DRDO, DGQA, MOD Finance. And this has been aligned with the Atma Nirbharta and Make in India initiatives. This does encourage FDI. It also takes into account leasing of equipment, dual-use technologies, and DRDO with the industry, as I said earlier. Manoj mentioned the list of 101 defense-related equipments banned for import. And of course, he also mentioned the Draft Defense Production, Export and Promotion Policy 2020. What do we understand from this? First and foremost, we believe the MOD has boxed itself into a corner, and in a way it is good because it has forced itself to move out in the open to provide a level playing field. The negative list, as we see, is a guide to Indian manufacturers, an opportunity to produce items using own design and development or with the DRDO. Foreign vendors through their subsidiaries would be treated like any other Indian company. We are looking at a huge financial outlay in the next 5 to 7 years, anything between $50 to $60 billion. And the DAP 2020 provides a platform to address these issues. However, there is a trade union pushback where they say the Indian vendor definition has been diluted, and any foreign company can register itself in India, acquire 74% equity, and still continue to be called an Indian vendor. There are, of course, political overtones to this. However, what we like to say is that ultimately we are looking at DAP 2020 as a huge boost to defense manufacturing. The negative list, if taken to its logical conclusion, will create a strong domestic defense industry and make India self-reliant. Concerns of all stakeholders will need to be addressed by the MOD, especially the policy continuity. HR issues of the Ordnance Factory Board have to be addressed. And it's still early days. Let us see how this rolls out. I would like to end by a slight modification to the Deng Xiaoping quote, where he said it does not matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. I would say it does not matter as long as the cat is Indian, whether it's black or white and catches mice. Thank you very much. Back to Manoj, please.
Thank you, General Murthy, for opening up the discussion on a much wider note. Several issues which I just hinted upon, you have elaborated and brought them into his views. He's had, he had a ringside view and he continues now to be in the ring. So over to General Saha.
Hello.
Yes, General Saha.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Manoj. Thank you, General Gautam Murthy, for including me in CASA and also inviting me to speak here to give you an user perspective as you desired. Very quickly, just a minute on the past. You have already touched upon it. To be more specific, at independence in 1947, we had a defense industrial base that comprised 18 ordnance factories, one defense public sector unit, and a small R&D setup. If you see it from that point in time, I think it was quite a huge complex that we started with. Unfortunately, as we moved ahead, we completely neglected it, and as perhaps some of you are aware, one of our ordnance factories was also tasked to make coffee making machines. So that's how we allowed it to slide. And then eventually the Sino-Indian conflict of 1962 was a wake-up call. We woke up with the start all right, but what did we do? We became, import and public sector dependent. Through the 80s and 90s, the sector expanded rapidly indeed to its current level of 41 ordnance factories and 9 defense public sector units. You might wonder why. And actually, if you ask me, the answer to this why it lies in the preamble of India's constitution. When we started with calling ourselves a sovereign democratic republic. But somewhere in our conduct, we added socialist. And finally, in 1975, we embodied it in the preamble to say socialist secular in addition to sovereign democratic republic. And I think let's forget the secular bit, that's not part of our charter here. But somewhere, this trying to define your economic order in a preamble, in other words, you're not giving the allowing it contemporary changes is, I think, where lies some of the answers to what we need in case you want to go back to the past and study. The other factor as to why did we become so Soviet dependent, General Gautam Murthy, mentioned in passing. If you're interested, I would recommend a read through of the Mitrokin archives, which, if not directly, indirectly tell you how we became so Soviet dependent. From a purely user point of view, I think for a long, long time as services and particularly Army, we left it to the system to decide how they should arm us, and we said we will fight with what we have. That, I think, has changed, and it has changed for the better. And today, by and large, there is a realization that unless as a user I am involved in the entire process, I do not get what I need. Between end 2015 and 2017, the first quarter, Army had conducted 32 Army industry interactions in different parts of the country and 9 Army industry academia. I mentioned it here. Mr. J.D. Patil was part of so many of them. And of course, besides that, equipment demonstrations, firepower display, forward area visits. Eventually, the Army Design Bureau came into being on 31st August 2016. From then and now, they have published 4 compendiums of problem statements, and there are some very useful outcomes. But then all that is a bit in the past. Let's talk now contemporary. You mentioned the 101 import embargo list, which was issued by the Ministry of Defense, prepared by the Department of Military Affairs. To that must be added another contemporary event which seems to have got missed out, is the list of 108 items that DRDO put out in follow-up to the 101, which the DRDO says is now passed on to the industry for design, development, and manufacture. And of course, DAP 2020 and the DPEP. I think in that import embargo list, there are 2 very common concerns when I speak to people who are serving and when I speak to some of my friends from the industry. I think the 2 most important concerns are A, it should not cause crucial gaps in India's defense capability, and B, India must not miss the technology cycles as it has done in the past, leading to emergency purchases in a security crisis. In what backdrop this comes, all of you know, so I don't go there. These concerns are driven mostly by our past experience, I think, of the triad of 1, research and development, 2, production, and 3, procurement. Firstly, the ability of DRDO to deliver by the stipulated timelines. Secondly, the ability of India's defense industry, dominated by ordnance factory and DPSUs, on whether they would be able to deliver, while maintaining cost, quality, and timeliness. Thirdly, the procurement setups emphasis on process rather than product or outcome is the primary concern. To my mind, to this triad must be added the crucial 4th dimension, that is the strategic direction and budgetary support. That's, I think, equally important. So I will start with the last one first. If you recall, in his inaugural speech at the DEF Expo 2020, Prime Minister Modi had announced the formulation of the long-term integrated perspective plan for 15 years. As the first step, I think we need to make relevant facets of the LTIPP available for guidance to the R&D and industry, both in the public and private sector. And the import embargo list must be seen in conjunction with the specific capability requirements which are defined in the LTIPP. Having said that, I think it is important that this LTIPP must factor the budget imperatives and have concurrence of the finance ministry. I repeat again, it must have concurrence of the finance ministry. LTIPP, which is based on an assumed year-on-year increase of budget, is unrealistic and has been a fundamental flaw in our planning process. Let me give you some figures. In 2015-16, our capital expenditure was 65,400 crores. 2016-17, it came down to 62,619. In 17-18, it went up marginally by about 10% to 68,900 plus crores. The following year, it went up by 5,000 crores to 73,000 crores. And 19-20, it went up by 16,000 crores to 89,000. In the current year, if you see, it is 90,047 crores. So now if you see, when we are making our LTIPP based on an assumed year-on-year increase in the budget, in reality, it is very different. In 2015-16, I recollect, where the parameter given to us was work on the basis of 15% year-on-year increase of budget. Look at it between 15-16 and the current, which I have compared right in front of you. Where is the 15% increase? I bring out this point with facts and figure to just emphasize that unless and until we have the budget concurred by the finance ministry, I don't see how we can take it forward. Whether you talk about FDI increasing, whether you talk about strategic partnership, unless and until the LTIPP becomes like a defense industrial planning document, I don't see how can you have serious commitment from the industry, whether it is domestic, whether it is FDI, whether it is otherwise. So I think this is a fundamental which needs to be addressed. The second thing is, even initiatives like innovation for defense excellence, the other initiatives that we are seeing, a whole lot of them that are coming out, unless and until they lead into procurement, what is the big deal? At the end of the day, if you're not procuring, I don't see how you find a solution. Over here, let me add here itself, my apologies for using this term, this gung-hoism for export. Please, unless and until it is being taken by your own armed forces, it is not so easy to export. Experienced people like JD are sitting on the panel today. They will tell you how much foreign countries insist on the item having been inducted into your country before going elsewhere. Well, anyway, to minimize uncertainty in defense capability, in 2019, the central government added a new term of reference for the 15th Finance Commission to state that you will examine the possibility of setting up permanent non-lapsable funding for India's defense needs. You are aware of the kind of presentations that were made to them at the MOD by the secretaries concerned, by the CDS and the service chiefs, vice chiefs, and so on. But now if you see by the latest media reports, several states have raised concerns with the 15th Finance Commission over the central government's proposal to create a non-lapsable defense fund out of the divisible pool of central taxes, pointing out that funds for defense should be allocated from the Consolidated Fund of India, as defense is the center's responsibility. I bring out this point to say that we cannot be wishy-washing with the budget for the defense. Unless and until we are sure, I don't see how we can, achieve any Nirbharta or Nirbharta, as somebody had said. So what is the recommendation here? I think it is crucial, absolutely, that the Defense Planning Committee, chaired by the National Security Advisor, the Chief of Defense Staff, 3 service chiefs, Defense, Foreign and Expenditure Secretaries, is the right forum to ensure seamless integration between national security strategy, confidential or open, that is immaterial. There must be a seamless integration between the national security strategy, capability development, and budgetary support. I think that is fundamental. My next point is, at the core of this Atma Nirbharta is research and development. And in India, we all know it, the nucleus of this is the DRDO. DRDO has had some marvelous success. Tejas, Akash, Agni, Prithvi, Pinaka, Swati, early warning system, sonar, just name it. Recently, they have had good success in the anti-satellite weapon systems and, of course, a demonstration of hypersonic technology. Yet, there are so many projects in small arms, ammunition, and such basic requirements of military technology that are unsuccessful, unduly delayed, or irrelevant. Now, if we talk about the import embargo list, I think the most crucial stakeholder in that, or most crucial agency for delivery in that, is the DRDO. And if you see the list of 101, in some cases, even the industry partners are yet to be identified. Given the strict timelines that have been stipulated for application of the import embargo, I think there is no scope for diffused accountability. It requires defining clear-cut responsibility for each key functionary by name and designation. You can take a leaf out of the way they do it in the UK. Letters are issued by name to Major General so-and-so in charge of the IPMT, Integrated Project Management Team, to make sure that it is delivered by him or his successor, and the controlling department expects that every handing taking over between such personalities is also, they are a party to that. Now, let's talk about the future warfare and DRDO. We all know that the spectrum of conflict has expanded well beyond military domain and fast moving towards AI, cyber, high energy weapons, hypersonic weapons, IoT, quantum technology, machine learning, nanotechnology, robotics, unmanned systems, space, and so on. Very rightly, DRDO has convened an expert committee recently to study and review the charter of all the 52 labs of DRDO to redefine the same for both current and futuristic defense and battlefield scenarios. And this committee is also charted to look at minimizing the overlap of technologies amongst the labs. In 2008, incidentally, a committee headed by Sri Ramarao, former Secretary Department of Science and Technology, had submitted the report after examining similar issues. But I must mention, many of its recommendations remain only partially implemented. I think it is important that the armed forces, I repeat again, armed forces and the DRDO jointly make a distinction between what are the core technologies of strategic importance for the long term and which are the projects meant to meet specific operational requirements in the immediate future. The expert committee today has only one member from the services. It is imperative that the expert committee be given an integrated armed forces DRDO perspective on these subjects that I said, on the core technology projects, and the expert committee must have members from all three services. Besides that, I think work which is being done on core technologies by other security-related agencies like BARC, ISRO, some IITs, and other engineering institutes and industry must also be examined and co-opted by the expert committee while redefining the charter of duties of the DRDO labs. Over the years, most of you will agree with me, DRDO has overstressed itself with 52 labs trying to cover the entire gamut from ASAT, hypersonic weapons, to psychological and food research. If we do a study of the number of DRDO products which have been introduced into the Army, Navy and Air Force, provides a very fair indication of the relevance and contribution of the many labs. Likewise, the protraction of projects year after year without outcomes also indicate futility of persistence without fresh ideas. In 2016, after a periodic review of DRDO projects and some lab visits, I had undertaken an exercise to focus research on directed energy weapons to meet specific operational requirements, which are relevant to India's threat perception and terrain. Amongst the issues that came to light were, A, there is a complete absence of operational guidance and there are multiple overlapping projects in different labs. with collaboration of all these stakeholders, a competent Army officer was posted to the leading lab, yielding positive results. Attempts were also made to minimize overlap, but I must tell you that in the absence of structured user oversight, such initiatives did not endure long enough. User guidance for DRDO projects, I think, is absolutely essential. Most Army officers posted to DRDO are on administrative assignments. Occasional lab visits by service officers from the headquarters and periodic review meetings are not adequate to provide the intimate guidance that is required. This point comes out clearly when we see distinctively good achievement of a DRDO lab, which is close.
Sorry, General Saha, you have been
muted.
muted by mistake. I think Mr. Prem Kumar Nair.
Sorry. We can hear you now. General Saha, we can hear you now. We lost you for a moment.
Okay, is it okay now?
Yeah, it's clear now. So if you're rounding up, that will be fabulous. Yeah, sorry.
No, okay, just a little more. Be a little patient.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Thank you, sir. Okay, in the 2017 Infantry Commanders Conference, followed by the annual Army Technology Seminar 2018, I had made a very humble recommendation that as services, we need to now start creating our own technology leaders cadre. It is not a very big exercise. It's a simple exercise. It can happen from within the system. I can send you a recommendation on this. Time does not permit explaining it, but we need to take charge of it unless we have technology leaders ruling it from ruling or at least guiding the process. I don't think we'll be able to get the kind of outcome that we get. Okay, the next point regarding DRDO. Now, DRDO has been offering TOT for both military technology, which they call category A, and dual use / commercial technology, which they call category B to the industry. If you review the list of technologies transferred so far, it comes out very clearly that the industry preference is much higher for dual use / commercial technology, and which is well understood because at the end of the day, the industry will see it from the point of view of commercial viability. But when you see it from the point of view of Ministry of Defense or the armed forces, in terms of the project cost, the manpower, the administrative cost, etc., we are not getting the value by such TOT. In any case, we have such a limited allocation for defense R&D from 2014-15 till 2018-19 financial years. The max that we have touched for defense R&D is 0.1% of GDP, and by and large, it has hovered around 0.09. With such a meager allocation, how can we be frittering away this money by transferring technology, which doesn't really serve the purposes of the armed forces as the primary requirement? Now, let's come to these 108 systems and components that the DRDO has put out to the industry for design, development, and manufacture. It is purportedly to allow the DRDO to focus on design and development of critical and advanced technologies and systems.
Sorry, General Saha, again you got muted. Would request the attendees to kindly bear with the moderator.
Okay, so I think it's absolutely important that DRDO carries out some policy and structural reforms to focus on core technologies of strategic importance. Now, if you keep in mind the DRDO's TOT experience, I think this needs to be drawn into this 108 items which they have put over there, and make everything which can be done in terms of facilitating the SMEs, maybe by creation of a capex fund, which can facilitate easy loans, long-term, etc., primarily for capital expansion and capacity enhancement. I think that would do some wonders. Now, once DRDO has done this, it is quite obvious that DRDO would not be particularly focusing on this 108 because their attention will go to the core technologies. So therefore, I think it is important that the service headquarters, through their IPMTs, integrated project management teams, take on these 108 items so that they remain relevant to what the forces want, Otherwise, you'll find industry committing itself to it, and eventually DRDO partially interested, forces not interested, and you add to the frustration. So that's the next recommendation. Coming to some specific user responsibilities, given the way DAP 2020 has come out, and there's guidelines on the...
General Saha, if I might, these have come in the chat box by way of specific queries addressed to you, this bit. So would we take these in the Q&A? It'll be much better because people are asking specific queries about this area that you of L&T, one of the biggest players in our defense industry, to share his thoughts and how he sees the change happening across, particularly over the last few years. Mr. Patil, please.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and humbled with the presence of so many from the armed forces whom I have seen in Puri. Admiral Puri I have seen as a young man, and of course the relationship continues. Let me say that we somewhere and somehow as a nation got our priorities wrong. We do not think R&D is required to be done for being Atma Nirbharta. Our entire Make in India focus is truly Make in India focus, although then Murthy talked about whether the cat is white and black, as long as it catches the mice. Mind you, when the cat is white, she comes in, does the job and goes away. She doesn't keep, giving you the ability truly to keep doing it on your own and keep doing the next generation far better and superior. Fundamentally, what we are really talking is R&D today is completely something which is discouraged by the government, and I'm bringing in a completely new or a different kind of a perspective. All R&D funding of Ministry of Defense is single point invested into DRDO. There's just no chance of anybody getting one naya paisa out of it. Also, if at all industry was someone who was wanting to put money in, earlier there were tax breaks. So if I could do something within next 5 years, I had a chance to recover part of it, not the entirety, but the part of it in the form of tax breaks. These tax breaks have been completely taken away by the current government. Probably the thinking at that point is that we will make the opportunities happen, and the opportunities will bring in that kind of a developmental money and investments. The opportunities have not come in for real. What Subrata Saha very rightly said about the budgets, I want to bring in one more dimension to that budget. We've forgotten that we brought in customs duties. We've forgotten that we brought in GST. If you just factor all the 3 points in, what you talked about, the inflation, which was very rightly brought out by Manoj, if all 3 you factor in, you are substantially negative on the budget. So we actually are looking at a shrinking market constantly, not only in terms of GDP, while I know that the percentage of the total funds which Government of India invests in capital, it's certain percentage of that also goes to defense, and that obviously is a constraint on the other perspective of it. Now, we obviously are a nation today who are saying that I don't need to do anything on R&D, doing my own product development, and we'll keep importing technology, and we'll keep on giving more multipliers. And you see it very, very clearly now. We have tried with offsets. When offsets we have only brought in, as Jan Subrata very rightly brought it out, we are getting a bit of, I would say, very positive about the big exports that we have done. But bulk of the exports truly have happened on the, completely at subsystem levels. Neither have got some great technology to the country. I remember when the offsets came in, the first beneficiary of the offset were mature companies, including the PSUs and the organizations like L&T and Tata's. But I tell you, within 1 year, 1.5 years, the foreigners understood the game and thereafter used the multipliers only to go to SME. And the SME they chose always was someone who already knew how to do it. So you only brought in build to print, and that build to print only came in the form of some commercial deals without getting anything for the industry in tangible terms. Good part, at least DAP 2020 today recognizes the fact that this has happened, and they're saying that I will now want to cut the multiplier on subsystems as long as it's complete systems that are getting exported. I will now want to look at that for the purpose of 1:1 kind of a multiply, while on subsystems and components, it is now being reduced from 1. It used to be 1.5 for MSMEs. So although MSMEs did get some business, but that brought in the sense of false, I would say, dependence, that because of offsets, we are surviving. Now, that's an aspect of technology which we have completely missed out. Look at what we actually did in all the MAKE programs right from 2008 when MAKE was enabled. And it's a story which will by itself tell us that we have got nothing right in anywhere in exactly 12 years. One tapa has gone. Out of this tapa, we did not find it worth to put in few tens and few hundreds of crores into development, and we keep talking of budgets which are a lakh of crore. I think somewhere our priorities have completely gone wrong, and as long as you don't do that and build your own ecosystem, someday to say that we will want to be Atma Nirbharta is going to be a pipe dream. Things will happen once in a while here and there. Some exceptional examples of what the industry has done will keep coming up. But where do we really see a structured way of looking at to build an industry with some kind of a ecosystem which gets created, a tierization gets created? Given the socialistic model, we built our PSUs who have always been monoliths, who try to do most of the things within. Exceptions obviously have been the government shipyards because they couldn't have, because of the physical limitations of area and I would say the spread in case of warships and those kind of equipment or platforms that were needed. They obviously had to depend on a whole lot of industry, and that's where you see only in case of Navy, you start seeing a substantial amount of indigenization. And those are at complete system levels, and they all get into the platforms, and that's the only sector. But Navy is a sector which is the smallest of the service and the smallest of the volumes. So it's typically like saying if you want to do and be happy with some 10, 20, 50, 100 crores here and there year on year, it's a business which is worth and doing it great. It doesn't really mean something which will in long run will start getting some kind of a volume or some kind of a growth, because the numbers remain limited. Now, this is essentially where one starts looking at overall perspective. The technology which is being put in today has always remained to that extent dependent on foreign supplies. There have been cases of amazing kind of thing which have happened in India, and thanks for already bringing it out, General Saha, on the strategic weapons. The strategic weapons hardly have any import, and that has all happened here. The ISROs have been created right here. It's 50 years of industry association with ISRO, and the same ISRO is able to fund industry. Same ISRO is able to say, I will give you assets which I will own. You keep them in your factory and you operate them, because if you invest, it just can't make sense putting that investment for that small amount of volume which is going to be taken by the government or by ISRO. And they find it within the same rules of doing business with the government. We keep talking of the same stuff cannot happen in Ministry of Defense, and we find reasons that it just cannot happen. But we see that the similar kind of scenarios exist with ISRO. Similar scenarios exist with the nuclear kind of a dimension, and that's where we can say that yes, as a nation, we have a triad. We are a nation who essentially have each and every of those strategic capabilities without anybody supporting us, and I see very clearly it happened primarily because of multiple eras of sanctions, and those sanctions really made sure that at least in those areas you had to do things on your own. Now I see the 101 item list, and of course this 108 item list, bulk of them, I have seen those lists and I have understood those lists quite well. The 108 item list, I differ with Jan Saha only in one aspect. It's a positive sign for DRDO to say we will not do it, but bulk of them are truly at part and component level. None of those are truly at a level where it's going to leverage some kind of a know-how or a knowledge. I mean, exceptions can always be found in all lists. The 101 item list I see as something which is a very positive thing, which for a long time one has been talking of, and I've been very clear communicator on this, that Upwas is good for health. And if we cannot buy in 5 to 7 years, we have no business to say we will buy from overseas or through a technology from overseas, allow the same 5 to 7 years, define a fundamental value of it, define the kind of R&D support that would be provided, and those products, if not in 5, 7, 8, 10 years, they will all happen here. And that's exactly what happened in the strategic sector. We created strategic sector capabilities within the country, and I belong to an organization which actually created some of these over last 6 decades, 5 decades and 3.5 decades respectively in the nuclear space and the defense scenario, and purely out of an R&D kind of a mindset. Given a chance, none of us ever would want to import anything. It's only what we cannot ever do, and that's an ethos in this company, because God created and World War II started. Even if you wanted to import, you couldn't have imported anything. You started doing things on your own, and that's exactly what is built into the blood of every Elantite, and that's what makes us quite different. We've been part of those success stories within the country in everything which can be started with the book of physics. I'm not even talking of engineering. Engineering we create thereafter. We created hypersonic capabilities within the country for ISRO from 2004. DRDO creates it now. But the ISRO had the hypersonic tunnels, which were the first ones which were built. We built the shock tunnels in the country which go into completely outer space kind of environment, all of it 15 years back, and its design and development included. So when we start looking at fundamentals of doing business, just one enabler which made ISRO dramatically different is to be able to trust the industry completely and say, I will provide you funds for development. I think that's one major aspect which is completely messed up in the defense kind of outlook, and that till the time we don't sort it out, I'm sure a decade thereafter we will still keep talking of we need import of technology and we need import of technology. And in the process, all of us know what comes in is not technology. What comes in is a production methodologies, and not truly why and how you can make a change and what will actually leverage it to be doing a completely different and a differentiated kind of a job. Those capabilities will just not happen. Obviously, as a part of the overall ecosystem, as I started with the R&D and technology, the next immediate thing that comes in is you need to build an ecosystem. How do I build an ecosystem as an industry? I have one 5,000 crore project and you see a 2,000 industry ecosystem that comes up. I'm talking of the Vajra story. There are no contracts of this kind ever trusted with the private sector. The private sector contracts have remained highest value contracts are typically 1,500 and 2,000 crores in the past. How does the ecosystem build? And the ecosystem building has never been the focus of the PSUs. Things are changing. I mean, anything that I say obviously has a history to the changes which have actually started happening. We need test and trial facilities, which essentially they all have existed with the DRDO. And DRDO, as long as you are associated with DRDO, you can always get an access to the test facility. You may not get a top priority if his project is going on and he's testing something for himself. You will obviously get the second priority, but the facilities have been available. Now, these days we are talking a lot about the facilities, but look at the model that we are wanting to pick up for that. The model for testing, we say, is there must be multiple industries who become the equity holders, and the government will bring in an equity into it, and it will be funded by government partially. I don't think with that kind of a model, with multiple stakeholders, anything which can work in long run, for a simple reason, there needs to be a master cook everywhere rather than multiple cooks who will only mess up the whole situation. When something goes wrong and something needs an overnight purchase, how will it happen unless it's completely in the private hands? It is just not possible for operating the test facilities and keeping on upgrading it to a next level of the kind of a capability. DAP 20 obviously have brought in huge number of positives, and I'm absolutely clear they have left some major negatives. but just about a couple of them. But in majority of the terms, as we see it from the industry, there's something substantial that has happened in terms of what the industry is enabled. Lots of areas where there used to be still a continuing nomination, they are behind us now. And I can say that with substantial amount of confidence, they are all behind us. 74% of equity is completely a misunderstood subject by substantial number of writers and spoken about. I can say that very clearly, no Indian category programs will ever allow that 74% company. They are all restricting to 49%, and it came in last 3 days of the DAP clearance process. And if we are talking of IDDM, we are talking of buy and make, we are talking of the make projects. Nobody can own more than 49% as a foreigner and still participate in that. And that's essentially where there's a trust, at least at some stage, building up in the ability of the Indian industry to be able to do some of those programs. And of course, where that 74 starts getting truly applicable is, anyway, if nobody is doing it here, you would have gone to a buy global. The same company now sets up here and says, I will sell under buy Indian. And if not under buy Indian, buy global manufacture in India is a new category which has been created. And under those, the 74 is enabled. So it's only 3 categories, and all 3 categories are open for industry to compete, the Indian ones. So nobody is saying that Indian companies cannot participate, and that's essentially where I see it's a positive challenge to the industry rather than actually getting worried about it, because in 73, when all of us were told to compete, Larsen & Toubro that day was just about 1,500 crore company, and today we are a 150,000 crore company. The growth did not come because we were worried of the foreign competition. We could take on the foreign competition, beat them in their own games, beat them on their own cost structures and on innovation. As industry, we have certain capabilities which are unmatched anywhere in the world. I think fundamentally we have missed out and messed up on hand-holding and supporting the industry in where it is needed the most. And those are the things which obviously going forward, one needs to truly correct. I see.
Mr. Patil, may I request if you can round up, then we'll.
Yes. In fact, I will come into last 2 points only.
Yes.
On the level playing field, since the subject was mentioned, and it's again a major issue between the PSUs and private and the foreign, because acquisition happens only under these 3 possibilities. The foreigner is the one who continues to be on a, I would say, red carpet, because what he supplies comes in at 0 taxes, and the user sees it as the least cost kind of an option. The PSUs obviously carry certain part of the taxes, but the PSUs today are benefited by the custom duty exemption, which the privates are not. So we are talking of fundamental gaps in our understanding of what is private and what is public industry. In one, you have, I wouldn't say 100%, but a substantial government ownership. Who is this government? Take any private sector, you will find today a substantial stake is from the government financial institutions. Where is the money coming from? The money in private sector is also a sizable part which comes out of the government financial institutions who have made that as a way of life. So we are not really talking of anything which is so dramatically different. The scale of equity may be different. It's only that in case of the defense PSU specifically, it's specific that the Ministry of Defense owns it, and that's where to some extent one has always seen, and Sanjay Mitra may not like this statement, but there is a soft corner always for a PSU ahead of anybody else comes in, and that's a structural issue which obviously in long term has to be addressed. The one specific aspect which I talked about is the custom duty exemption. The second aspect in the PSU and private, when we are put to competition together, which is completely missed out, is one sector has always got government funding and the assets have always been funded and there is no asset carrying cost. Anybody who runs a balance sheet understand if you have 1,000 crore asset on your book, the depreciation and interest takes nothing less than between 200 to 250 crores every year. Otherwise, that goes as a loss on your balance sheet every year. Now, where does this money come from for the private? He must recover it out of the job he is going to bid for, whereas for a PSU, it's for gratis. I think that's the most single important aspect of competition. We think that competition means that allowing you to bid, and there's a PSU and a private, both will bid and both on merit will win. We got it somewhere wrong. We need to fundamentally factor in that it's Government of India's money that has gone in, and that Government of India's money has some value. It's not a useless money which has gone in, which should not recover anything. There's an asset recovery which must happen at a certain rate. Asset recovery is something which got to happen. I think on that point I will stop.
Thank you so much, Mr.
So much.
Patil. Thank you, Mr. Patil. 2-3 quick points. One, you have mentioned what we can do at ISRO and achieve in our space. There's no reason why we can't do it in other sectors such as defense as well. I think that came through very, very emphatically. The other point that you made equally strongly was if there can be an open, which I had alluded to in my opening remarks about an open skies policy, giving a SPICE or a Indigo an opportunity to fly the skies as with Air India. Similar such should be made available to L&Ts and or any other defense oriented companies in our private sector. I have only one small disagreement with you, sir, with respect, and in half serious and jest. When I went to LSE as a student many years ago, I studied under the legendary John Gray, and this is what we learned. He says, manufacture what you can best, import the rest. You know, obviously that was the last millennium, and things are now changing. And I noticed with pride when you spoke about how in L&T it is a matter that all of you look at doing things and building things yourself rather than procuring them from elsewhere. And perhaps it is with that spirit that we will actually achieve self-reliance and self-sufficiency. You made a direct point to and you mentioned Mr. Sanjay Mitra by name, and he's been one of the few defense secretaries in our country who also served as acting head of DRDO. So he has straddled many of those. So it's now my pleasure and privilege to invite Mr. Mitra to speak to us.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, Manoj. It's a great pleasure to be here and address such a distinguished gathering. I'm somewhat intimidated. There we have Air Chief Marshal Raha, and we have Dil Saha, and we have JD Patil. Never mind, I'll try my best. I have only very few observations to make. We need to take a dispassionate look at this list of 101. I did a cursory look, and I think, as Mr. Patil said, most of it is Navy, and a big chunk is Air Force. So if you look at those LCAs and the light combat helicopters and the warships program of the Navy, put together, they'll be about 200,000 crores. And the others, the army part is very small volume, to pardon my word, small change. But anyway, we can take a closer look. I think the case is there for a very close look at this list and not go overboard for whatever this list is. For example, if you add submarines and LCM Mark 1 and you add the transport aircraft, that itself is a very large amount. Forget all the Navy items. Anyway, having said all that, it's a landmark announcement, and we are actually, I agree with Mr. Patil that we are sending a signal. This signal was sent for space and atomic energy by foreigners who said, we'll not sell anything to you. That's when the difference comes between space and defense, space, atomic energy and defense. Defense, the foreigners are interested in selling to us. They always have been. 40% of our procurement under the defense procurement procedure has been government to government. It has been strategic buying. Whether you like it or you don't like it, for political reasons or for defense reasons, strategic buying will continue. And at times it is linked to defense preparedness. So really you can't, put them apart. The second point is I agree with General Saha that procurement should be professionalized. I firmly believe it should be shifted to the Department of Military Affairs under the CDS. Otherwise, this dichotomy will continue, and 5 years later, if you have Manoj, another seminar, webinar, we will again listen to the same thing. So if the person who uses if he or she is not responsible for buying, you will continue to have this discussion again and again. Only the DMA can reconcile defense preparedness and self-reliance. This preparedness business is very important because we can't suddenly say when the crisis breaks that, look, I can't fight with this, indigenous weapon. It doesn't fire far enough, and it doesn't hit the target. It tends to hit the chap who's firing. So you can't have this. You listen to the discussion on OFB, there is a great deal of dissatisfaction. There's a great deal of dissatisfaction over DRDO. Having said that, DRDO is doing the nuclear submarines. DRDO just did all these missiles. And DRDO also did the anti-satellite. So clearly they're better at the high-end stuff than with the relatively low-end stuff. I'm actually mystified by the whole thing. Again, I'll say that we have to pass on the responsibility for procurement to the armed forces, and only they can reconcile the business of preparedness. Some clarifications which I thought the House may like to have. Exports are unlikely. Why? Because the country you're exporting to will ask, does your own army buy this? When we say no, then of course they say no too. But when it comes to offshore patrol vessels, when it comes to frigates, when it comes to maritime patrol vessels, well, we have a very good record. We say the Navy buys it, the Coast Guard buys it, so the other governments buy it. So that is one caveat that I wanted to introduce. The other one is non-lapsable funding. Now, this arose because the Defense Ministry was unable to spend its funds, and so the funds lapsed. So there was a demand for a non-lapsable fund. But for the last 3-4 years, I'm sure about 3, we have spent all our money. In fact, I probably will be hauled up for spending more than the budget in one particular year. So the non-lapsable fund will have no money. Why are we getting carried away about the non-lapsable fund when we are beginning to, because of the changes we made in our procedure, we are beginning to spend all the defense allocation. The other issue is this comparison with the GDP. Defense expenditure is a percentage of GDP. Defense GDP is a notion. The central government expenditure is a fact of life. Defense expenditure may be 2% of GDP, but it's 33%. Defense capital expenditure of 100,000 crores is a third of central government's total capital expenditure. We can, of course, the House can take a call on guns versus butter, but there is very little butter, then maybe the guns may not be necessary altogether. So these are some points I want to make. And there was one interesting thing, maybe General Saha can throw some light. We had started this AK-203 factory with Russian collaboration, and we deliberately put an army man in charge. I don't know what is happening to that. It was supposed to go on stream somewhere in the middle of this year. Maybe he can enlighten. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving us this overall perspective, particularly given that you have been both Secretary of Defense and also looked at DRDO from extremely close quarters. You did bring in the Navy in more than one context, and several other speakers have also spoken about, you brought in, Sanjay, you brought in the Navy in the context of our frigates, etc., being built indigenously and therefore being export worthy. And it also came up in the context of this entire list of 101 items, where the Navy has shown a great amount of initiative. Our Prime Minister also alluded to are playing a role in the Indian Ocean region. And therefore, it's my pleasure now to invite Admiral Puri to share his views. Admiral Puri? Admiral Puri?
So your
mic is on mute.
Okay. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to make my views on this issue of Atma Nirbharta before you. I have had a long experience in trying to do indigenous development, not just at this point in time, but from the time I joined the armed forces. I've had long interactions essentially with DRDO and the industry. I seldom looked at anybody, any multinational or anybody who thinks he can give us something. And I will basically want to talk on policy issues that affect Atma Nirbharta.
Admiral Puri, can you come closer to the mic, please? We're losing you on audio. If you can speak closer to the mic, please. Thank you.
Okay. Am I all right now?
Yes, much better, sir. Much better. Much
Okay.
better, sir.
So I will be covering basically the issues related to policy. At the policy level, we have basically two things to sort out. One, how do we set the requirement to our domestic R&D and industry? By domestic R&D, I don't mean just DRDO. It could be the industry, it could be ISRO, it can be anybody. But how do we set our requirements to them? And then, what are the issues in meeting this requirement? From the Vivekananda International Foundation, we have given two reports. One on the issues of setting the requirement, the other a detailed report on the issues of meeting these requirements. And I believe both these issues need to be sorted out for a smoother flow into Atma Nirbharta. As far as setting the requirement is concerned, first of all, I think we must get rid of this idea of Make in India. Make in India we have been doing since our independence. What was licensed production? It was basically Make in India. And all that we have done till today is largely focused on Make in India. One of the great, we curse the ordnance factories, and I don't want to decry anyone who's doing it, because there are problems. But if we look into fundamentals of their problem, the problem is that 90% of their production, or maybe 88% of their production, is through this whole issue of transfer of technology. And in this business of transfer of technology, today, after first 5-7 years are passed, and you land up into deep repair problems and other issues, you find neither the DGQA is capable of helping them, nor they themselves are capable of helping themselves in many areas, because they don't have the necessary design data, neither do have a design organization to fall back to do certification of what they are doing. And second thing, ammunition you can import. But I don't think any country in the world can afford to import ammunition in the quantities they are required. In a war, shiploads will not help you. And so you have to do it yourself. The net result, you have to do reverse engineering from basic data without knowing the fundamentals. And there I think HEMRL, which is a DRDO lab, has done a yeoman job for this country. Yes, there have been problems, but we have had to develop all the propellants back from zero ourselves. And that is one reason that it is easier to have your own design and develop something than to take something from abroad and then start doing reverse engineering on a thing like ammunition is a very difficult proposition. Of course, there are quality issues with the ordnance factories, and I have written a report for the Ministry of Defense on this, where one of the things was corporatization. But I still feel that I'm not failed to understand, like the Navy has a Naval Armament Inspection Organization, which takes into its fold officers who do nothing else but naval armament inspection. They don't become, lieutenant general, vice admirals and admirals, but they specialize in what they do and help the Navy create things, especially in armaments, from boom to tomb, till they are disposed. We have lesser problems with the OSB than the Army has. I have not understood why we have a DGQA under the Ministry of Defense with officers who are there on permanent deputation with no particular qualification to be there in that job in the first place. Why can't the Army have its own armament inspection organization? And if they have to create one, I don't think it's a difficult task. And the Naval Armament Inspection Organization can help them. The Naval Armament Inspection, there have been many accidents in depots. Navy seldom has had any such problem. The Naval Armament Inspection Organization, independently, which reports to the Vice Chief of Naval Staff, goes to every depot, sees that ammunition which is required to be proof tested is proof tested or not, and is there at every stage of the depot's working. I will leave this at that. But now let me come back to policy. In setting the requirement, clearly we need an integrated force development plan. And any force development plan has to be based on the outcomes of a strategy that you want, that we desire, and it is linked to resources. And I think General Saha brought out a very pertinent point in this regard. We have a DPC. We have now we have a CDS also. We have a Department of Defense. There are many verticals that have to integrate to produce this document. But I am afraid everybody is working in his own silo. That was the situation when I was the CISC. And I hope it is improving now, but I don't see very much of it. And if we say that the defense budgets are not enough, then the obvious thing is we have to look into our strategy. I agree with Mr. Sanjay Mitra that it is not the GDP which decides the defense budget, it is central government's budget. We have the lowest GDP to tax ratio in the world. Until this ratio improves, I don't see how and we will produce more resources that we need. Marginally, maybe yes, but I don't see any substantial increase coming by. And if that is the case, let me as a naval officer ask, can we afford 3 carriers with all their air wings? Forget about in the present strategy, blue water strategy, which we have defined for whatever reason, and the government, I don't know whether they have accepted it or not. But fact is, I do believe we need to change over from this Mahanian strategy to what the Chinese did is an anti-access area denial strategy, which is cheaper to execute, will require more submarines, will require more denial weapons, but these very costly platforms, we will not be able to fund within the budgets that we have. And I don't see them increasing very much. So I think this whole business of force structuring needs to be looked into all over again. We can't go by the premise that I was sanctioned so many ships in the year 1964, and I was sanctioned, and we worked out a 30-year submarine program for so many submarines. A lot has changed since then. Or we have so many air squadrons. Well, I have nobody to comment on because I have not studied that enough. But fact is, aircraft capabilities have grown leap and bounds, and so have their costs grown leap and bounds. And I don't know whether in the budget that we have, what we can afford. And we have to afford those things that meet our strategic goals, which at the minimum are defense of national integrity, and see what we can do for that, and then see what we can do for becoming a regional power. Can we afford an expeditionary force at this with these economics? I doubt. So I think these larger issues, General Saha said well that we should discuss in the Defense Policy Committee, but I am afraid to work this Defense Policy Committee, we will require a lot of change in getting policy papers, having them formulated, moving them through a review before they come up to the DPC. We will not be able to take any decisions this way or that without detailed policy paper discussions. Next, let me come to the issue of how do we proceed having set the requirements. And I have not talked about the process of planning in this, and I will talk about that. We have said that the perspective plan today is a wish list. And if we have today a bundle of AONs without the resources to execute them, it is largely a result of this wish list experiment. The planning process, in my view, even if there is a well thought out plan, and if we want to achieve Atma Nirbharta Bharat, which can only be achieved by design, development, and production through indigenous R&D and industry. I think any other method of trying to do it will be necessary in areas. I am not saying so. But even if we have a 20-year goal that we want to reach there, then this area has to be focused. And for that, the planning process needs to understand the stages in which design, development, and production takes place. It starts with a requirement from the armed forces. And in this requirement making business is the first element. And the requirement of the armed forces, in my view, while it is the armed forces' prerogative to make their requirements based on their systems analysis. And I said there must be a systems analysis on it. To determine what I require also requires a systems analysis. It requires simulation. How much, I mean, we have all been there. How much of it do we carry it out? Then, having done this much, it requires a system engineering exercise with the development agency. If it's the private sector, well, if it's L&T, then L&T ke saath karna padega. If it is DRDO, then with DRDO. These services who have to guide their and see that their operational needs are adequately catered for in the system engineering exercise, which will have to be done by specialists. And only then systems requirements worked out. Otherwise, we'll have this scenario. I have long seen in CVRD tanks At one time, it's a smooth bore. The next time, it becomes rifled. It again changed to smooth bore, without realizing that each one of these has a downside effect on the entire design of that tank. And you start from grade zero again. And this change in specifications is largely because we don't do a systems engineering exercise. This exercise has been done, in my view, in the LCA program. The first of the type doesn't come in less than 25, 30 years anywhere in the world. It has taken F-16 that much time, and perhaps it has taken us little more time given our industrial state. But fact is, although this was developed, the designs of frozen, the development started somewhere in 1993 or 1994, and the first aircraft flew in 2001. The aircraft remains relevant today because growth in technology, at the time this design was completed, nobody thought of using composites the way they have been used. Nobody thought of a 4-channel digital fly-by-wire system. It was not available anywhere in anywhere, but they knew that in time to come, this will become necessary.
Admiral Puri, may I request? Admiral Puri, may I request? We are running out of time terribly. Not your fault at all, but my sincere apologies. But if you might round up, please, and then we'll come back.
Okay, I'll round up. So I will say that the developing the system requirement specification is not a job that can be done by floating RFIs. RFIs will tell you what is the marketing brochures available today and what you can get today. And by the time the system comes, even if you make that buy and make deal, there will be a number of things that will be obsolete in it. Next is the question of doing a prototype, and next are the issues. Now, all these issues I have discussed in very great detail, and they all need to be sorted out. And a fundamental thing is we need to have large programs. A submarine program. Once we have done we were doing an ATVP, I do not see any reason why we didn't start a conventional submarine program with it. Today we make that ATVP, and this business of indigenous content to me, design and develop. Design is far more important than indigenous content. Indigenous content will come in subsequent years provided you hold the design. But if you don't hold the design, you will find difficult doing even obsolescence management. And there, ATVP is a good example. Our missile programs are a good example. Initially, their indigenous content may have been only 25-30%. But look at the ATVP program. By the time second submarine comes out, it will be 70%, and by the time the third and the fourth come out, it will be close to 90%. And I think Mr. Patil knows how all this being achieved. So my view is that we have Atma Nirbharta must mean design, development, and production through indigenous research and development. Which agency does it? In most of the cases today, it will have to be the DRDO. But in aircraft, there are areas, especially in heavy engineering, armament, where the private sector can do it. But we must know in which areas can do it. The second thing is this business of competition. United States has a budget of $760 billion. We have got a budget of $60 or $70 billion. They have a total of 1 Lockheed Martin, 1 Boeing, 1 Raytheon. There are the majors. We cannot have too many system integrators. We need to create champions. And that champion We can't always say I must have 2 and I must have. There will be areas where you can have 2. Maybe with tanks which you require in 3,000 and 4,000, you can have 2 system integrators. But there will be areas where you can't do with anything more than 1. Maruti Udyog is a good example. They, on policy, don't do more than 1 or 2 vendors. Second thing is this ecosystem. Once we have good system integrators, they will find good tier 1. Some things they will do themselves, and it is the tier 1 who will find the tier 2 and they will find the tier 3 also.
General Shankar, please.
Thanks a lot. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I must thank Admiral Puri, Mr. Sanjay Mitra, Lieutenant General Saha, and my very good friend, Mr. J.D. Patil, for having put across some real good wisdom on this show. And I have very little to say, and I'll most probably I'll sum it up. And I'll sum it up with a slide, a couple of slides which I had made, and I'm sure it'll work. Yeah, can you see the slide, please?
Yes, sir, we can.
Right, gentlemen. If you see, take the sum of what all has been told today, you'll see procurement, acquisition, whichever way you put it across, is a sum of 3 factors: political will, budget, and ability. That's what has come out generally. In our country, we missed. When we had the political will, we didn't have the budgets. When we had the budgets, we didn't have the political will. Right now, we have the political will, our budgets are not there. But this third circle called the ability is something we've always had a problem with. And I'll take what Mr. Sanjay Mitra said and take it forward. If you want to have the ability to procure, it has to be driven by the military leadership at the FX. And that's what he said. And to a large extent, that's what Subrata Saha also said. Right? And then you have the bureaucracy which oils the whole thing. And in my experience, the political will and the bureaucracy, if the political will is there, the bureaucracy swings there. The bureaucracy doesn't hold things just because they're bad or good or no. They go with the flow, right? They're accountable to the government, and that's how it is, right? So that happens. And then you have something called the process compact. When I say the process compact, it is our trials, DRDO, all these issues put together, right? And that is something, again, if the military leadership and the bureaucracy is okay, this gets sorted out. So I come back to the fundamental thing, which I go with what Mr. Sanjay Mitra said. I think it's time for the military leadership to take ownership of the whole situation. There was a time when, for many reasons, it didn't happen. And it's my personal experience, you take ownership and it gets done. And what does that involve? It involves good perspective planning, which people have touched upon. It comes on to realistic requirements, again, with something we have spoken of. It comes to knowledge, which Subrata Saha, General Saha mentioned. You need to have, probably time has come to have a separate cadre, which Admiral Puri also mentioned. Why not have our own capability in terms of inspection? That means knowledge. Then you need continuity, right? And then, of course, last but not the least, something which I learned first day in the forge, irada. Irada chahiye ki karna hai. Agar karna hai to hoga. And that is something which I think we've lacked, right? All through. We wanted it, but did we have the irada to do it? I see certain aspects of irada coming in, and I'm sure things will work out further ahead. Long back, 2 years back, I wrote an article in which I said there should be surgical strikes on the Defense Procurement Ministry. In my opinion, I went through it, it stands good even today. Right? The first strike, overall the overweight MOD. It is not capable of doing all this. That's what it has proven. Second strike, you have successful models, replicate them. There is a model in Navy, AD, and artillery, right? And we also have outside this ISRO and space, which was nuclear energy, which we've spoken of. And we need to, the second part is eject, tried, tested, and failed self-proclaimed as experts. They dominate the Delhi talk circuit. They should be, I think, sidelined. Third strike, reform OFB, DPSUs, and DRDO, and make them perform. We've invested in building their capacities for 7 decades. Management must perform or be changed ruthlessly. That's something which we have to do, no one else. Fourth strike, get down to serious knowledge-based indigenization, which is inclusive in nature to public and private players. That's what Mr. J.D. Patil said. You need to have a level playing field, otherwise nothing goes forward. The fifth strike, I think the time has come to have a defense procurement advisory board. If the NSA can have a advisory board, why not defense procurement? It was a crying need of the hour. I've written about it also. I've discussed with Admiral Puri. We need to empower commissions to get some critical equipment off the ICU list and procure them. Empower that commission, let them do it. There's something like the British model, which again, I think Subrata spoke of. Then, of course, you're going to have this disruption in military affairs. It's happening. Disruptive technologies are making the brick and mortar defense industry redundant. If we are not up to scale, we're going to be out of it. The next strike, the defense budget must be, it must fund outcome-based critical projects beyond normal allocation and not based on the percentage of GDP, which has got no value. We need a capability. Can you fund it? Make it focused and things will work out. And of course, the last strike, develop a knowledge path for defense technology and management for grassroots rebels. We don't have it, right? And our knowledge base must be deeper. This is what I've had to say. In some kind of a way, there's also thanks for all the participants and also all the people who spoke. We enlightened by all what you said. Like what General Gautam Murthy said at the beginning, we're going to have a series of webinars. This is one umbrella kind of a webinar, but we're going to break it down into its pieces. We're going to have more interaction. We're going to have more players speaking up. We're going to have people coming on and exchange views and make it more like a workshop where we can come out with some practical solutions. Enough of talking and let's start doing. And I'm sure we can do. Thanks a lot for listening. And now I think with the
thank you, General.
Time we have, we'll take on a few questions also.
General, General Shankar, first and foremost, I must compliment you. And I'm really, really thrilled this evening by one thing more than anything else. That for a change, I saw the bureaucracy being agreed with by the Army and the Navy.
Yeah, why not?
That seldom, if ever, happens. So obviously, obviously there is some hope for us. There's one other thing, as we end. I'm really not sure our link will permit us questions. Unfortunately, should we try, because the link might snap at any time.
No, we'll try one odd question.
We'll try, right. So this one is to Mr. Sanjay Mitra specifically. Isn't this Sanjay, can you hear me? You're on mute. So this one for Mr. Mitra specifically. Isn't this the right time to shift the DGQA from under the defense production and place it under DMA?
I totally agree. This was General Raman Puri, Admiral Raman Puri's recommendation 3 years ago, and I tried to push it, but there was a big pushback. It should be done because otherwise there is a conflict of interest.
So how do you think this imbroglio or this blockade can be best unknotted in the country's interest?
It's a one-line order which says that from today, DGQA moves out of Department of Defense Production to the DMA.
No, but with due respect, someone with your vision and ability to push things, if you were blocked, how do you think this is going to happen in future? Where is that will going to come from?
No, because thereafter a big change took place. We got the CDS.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have the Department of Military Affairs. What I'm trying to say, let the military affairs be responsible for everything. So that 5 years from now, when you have the discussion, nobody can turn around and say, well, I didn't have this cooperation, I didn't have the power. You have the power to set the requirements, as Admiral Puri has said, realistic requirement. You have the power to look at the budget. I'm afraid I don't agree with General Shankar. There is no money. There is no question of going beyond the existing budget because there isn't enough GST coming your way. Unless you have another special income tax or special, cess, whatever it is. But that will only mean that you'll have less money for butter. You need some butter, You can't only have guns. But it can be done very easily. It should be done. This was one of the prime recommendation of Admiral Puri's committee a couple of years back. And there is absolutely no, it can be done very easily because the CDS has been created. The momentum should be kept up and it should be moved out.
Right. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of a wonderful session.
I think Mr. Patil wanted to share something.
Sorry, Mr. I apologize. Mr. Patil, did you want to say something?
Incidentally, we had a couple of weeks back a very, very close chat, a small group with CDS on the same subject. And I said that Navy seems to have succeeded simply because the Admiral, two-star Admiral who looks after the QA, actually is a part of Navy. He goes in there for 3 years and gets back and part of the Navy. All along he reports to the Vice Chief, and as a result, it works in case of Navy. And he says, you just gave me a solution. So I thought that's relevant. Now that we are talking on the DGQA, that's exactly. It's simply that the man who gets deputed needs to be told he will go and he will come back. He will not stay there permanently. He automatically will listen to the armed forces.
So let's hope that something which has worked in one area will also be implemented and hopefully be successful across the board. It gives me great pleasure, to say that we've had a very, very wonderful, riveting seminar. There's been great learning, and I find great happiness in being part of this because my own learning hugely evolved, and I see the passion and interest with which each one here participates. And being from Calcutta, I wish to end this session with a few lines from our revered Rabindranath Tagore, who said this in a different context. And some in this panel will be familiar with these lines. And it goes like this: where the clear stream, and I apply this to our present situation on hand, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit. Dead habit is what we have hitherto become used to. Where the mind is led forward into ever widening thought and action. Into that state, and here I change the word, into that state of self-reliance, let my country awake. So with these words slightly tweaked to suit our purpose, a very, very big thank you to all our panelists, to all our participants. Until the next time, thank you. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you.